Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chavre Tzedek. I'm Rabbi Rory Katz, and I'm excited that we have a few different things we are celebrating today. The anniversary of Bernie Shapiro's bar mitzvah. He's leading our Haftarah portion, and Ellie's return from college, and probably some other things as well. By way of kavanah or intention for this morning service, I wanted to share the concept of Milat Mancha, or Leitwort, I believe is the German, which means like heavy word. One word that appears in this week's Torah portion a lot, Parshat Miketz, is shalom. And there's a sense in study of Torah, both this concept comes both from like the rabbinic tradition and also from the academic biblical criticism tradition, to pay attention to like when there's a heavy repetition of a word in a certain parsha. So this week's parsha, the word shalom appears with a high frequency. So I invite you, as you're going through your prayers, we also have shalom a lot, and paying attention to where we're finding peace, where we're finding a sense of wholeness in our prayers. And with that, I want to pass the mic to Amit to lead us in our Shacharit morning service. Thanks, Amit.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Shabbat Shalom. We're starting on page 106 in the Shabbat Sim Shalom, and starting on page 338 for those of you that have the weekday Sidur Shalom that also has the Shabbat service. We're starting with the Yishtabach, which goes into Chatzi Kaddish and Barchu, so I'm going to stand.
Invite everyone else to stand as well, if you're able.
Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu El HaMelech HaGadol HaKadosh B'Shamayim V'Aretz ברכות והודות מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך אל חיי העולמים. יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה, יעמד דברי קירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכנו וימיכנו חיי דכל בית ישראל. בגלה ובזמן קריב יאמרו אמן. יהי שמך ומבורך לעולם לעולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלך שבקדושה בריחו לילה מקבחתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דם נירם בעלמה ויאמרו אמן. ברכו את אדוני המבורך. Baruch Adonai Amvorach Le'olam Va'ed. You may be seated. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or choshech oseh shalom uborei et hakol. Hakol yaducha v'hakol yishapchucha. אין כרך אדוני אלוהינו בעולם הזה, ואין זולתך מלכנו לחיי העולם הבא. אפס פרטך גאלנו לימות המשיח, ואין דומה לך מושיענו לתחיית המתים. We're on page 108 in the Shabbat Sim Shalom, and we're on page 342 in the weekday one. אל אדון על כל המעשים ברוך ומבורך בכל נשמה גודלו וטובו מלא עולם דעת ותבונה סובבים אותו המתגאה על חיות הקודש ונדר בכבוד על המרכבה זכות ומישור לבני חיסו חסד ורחמים לבני כבודו טובים מאוד שברא אלוהינו יצרם בדעת בבינה והשכל כוח וגבורה נתן בהם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל, מלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה, נאה זיווה בכל העולם, צמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם, עושים בימה רצון קונם. פר וכבוד נותנים לשמוע צולה ורינה לזכר מלכותו, קרא לשמש ויזרח אורה והתקין את צורת הלבנה, שבח נותנים לו לא צבא מרום, תפארת וגדולה, סחפים ואופנים וחיות הקודש. We continue silently on page 109 or 342. לאל אשר שבת מכל המעשים. Middle of the page 110 or 344. וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה ובטהרה, בשירה וזמרה וברכים ומשבחים ומפארים ומריצים ומקדישים וממליכים את שם האל המלך הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, הקדוש, וכולם מקבלים עליהם ברוך. להקדיש ליוצרם בנחת רוח, בשפה ורוח ונימה קדושה, כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים ביראה, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלך על הארץ כבודו. באופנים וחי את הקודש פרש גדול, מתנסים ליומת, שרפים למטה, משבחים ואומרים ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. והיה ברוך לימת יתנו. Bottom of page 110 or 344. O חדש על ציון תאיר, 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 ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו, ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות. We're on page 111 or 346. אהבתנו אדוני אלוהינו, חמלה גדולה ותרחם עלינו. אבינו מלכנו בעבור אבותינו, שבטחו בך אבינו מלכנו. ותלדם חוקקיים, כן תחננו למדנו, אבינו ברחמן, רחם עלינו. ותן בליבנו להבין להשכיל לשמוע, ללמוד וללמד, לשמוע ולעשות, ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה, והארננו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחל לבבינו ויחלו וירא את שמך, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, כי בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו. כי הפועל ישועות אתה, ובנו בחרת מכל עם ולשון, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול. סלע באמת להודות לך וליחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר במו ישראל באהבה. page 112 or page 346. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך והבהרת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובמלאכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, ושמתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בניניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. והיה אם שמוע תשמע מצוותיו של ונתתי את שלך. וכתבתם על page 113 or page 348. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ועשו להם ציצית על גנבי בגדיהם לדורותם ונתנו הציצית הגנב תתפלת והלכם לציצית וראיתם אותו זכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם ולא תדורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר הם זונים אחריהם למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Continue on page 114 silently, or 350. לדוב הגדול קיימת שמו קיימת כיסון נכון ומלכותו ויאמת עליו קיימת. אמת שאתה עוד נע אלינו ולא אבותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו גאלנו גאל אבותינו יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פדינו מצילנו מלאם שמך אלוהים זולתך. תהילה לעליון ברוך ומבורך, משה ובני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם. We're in the bottom of page 114 or the top of page 352. מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדע בקודש, נוראתי לו דוסף אלה. שירה חדשה שיבחו גולים לשמך על שפת הים, יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל, קומה בעזרת ישראל, עובדי קרבך, יהודה וישראל, גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל, ברוך אתה אדוני ישראל.
I invite you to rise for this.
Page 115b. 115b or 354. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Eloi Avoteinu Eloi Avraham Eloi Yitzchak Eloi Yaakov Eloi Sarah Eloi Rivka Eloi Rachel Eloi Leah האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא האל העליון גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות, מביא גואל לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר מושיע מגן. ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, לחיים איתי מטרה להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מחלגל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ברוב חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדור מלך, מלך ממיד ומחיה, ומצביע ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני לחיי המתים. Continue on page 116 or 356. נקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב היד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ואמר קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך על הארץ בראותו. אז בקול רעש גדול, אדיר וחזק משמיעים כה, מנסים למצרפים, לעומתם ברוך אמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. במקומך מלכנו תופיע, ותמלוך עלינו כי מחכים אנחנו לך. מתי תמלוך בציון, בקרוב בימינו לעולם בעת תשכון. תתגדל ותתקדש בתוך ירושלים עירך, לדור ודור לדור ודור לנצח נצחים. ועינינו תראנה מלכותך, כדבר אמור בשירי עוזך, ידי דוד משיח צדקך, ימלוך עליך לעולם ולעד ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, לשבחך עלינו מפינו אלוהינו של עם ועד, כי על מלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. Silent Amida is continued, going back to 115a or 354 and through the end of the Silent Amida. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. אמרו אמן. יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. We turn to page 138 or 392 for Kaddish Shalem. יתגדל ויקדש שמך רבה, ועמד יברך חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וימיכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רב מבורך, לעולם לעולם יתברך. ברך וישבח ויפאר ויתרומה וינשא ויתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלש מקודשה בריחו. לילה מן כה בחטא ושירתה תשפרתה ונחמתה דמירם בעלמה ואמרו אמן. תגבל צלותנו ואותו דכל ישכל קדם ובן וישמע ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. Okay. So I'm going to hand the baton back to Rabbi Katz for Torah introduction.
So Parshat Miketz starts with Pharaoh being plagued by a dream. Is there noise in my background? All right. Sorry. So Parshat Miketz starts with Pharaoh being plagued by a dream, and he can't sleep at all. And finally, his wine bearer says, "Well, when I was in prison, there was this guy who I forgot had this power to tell me that I was actually going to come free." You know, Joseph's been in prison for who knows how long, and all of a sudden, the wine bearer remembers his life is saved by Joseph. And so Pharaoh says, "Okay, go and bring him before me," because apparently none of Pharaoh's expert dream interpreters could interpret this dream either. The dream is of 7 cows, 7 fat cows, and 7 very, very lean cows. It doesn't seem like it should be the most complicated of dreams, but for some reason, nobody seems to be able to interpret it. So Joseph comes from prison, and Pharaoh's like, "Oh, great, finally you can interpret my dream." And Joseph's like, "Me? I can't interpret your dream. God will interpret your dream." But he says, actually, he uses the word shalom. This is the first appearance of the word shalom in this week's parsha. God will see to your peace. And he says, okay, so there's these 7 very fat cows represent 7 very plentiful years. And then there's going to be after that 7 very scrawny, very years where the harvest is going to be terrible, and there's going to be a great famine through the land. And Pharaoh is so relieved, and he gives Joseph a high appointment in the court, and they start to prepare for these 7 years of famine that are going to come. And the famine goes not just in the land that the Pharaoh rules over, but it goes throughout the entire region. And so Joseph's family ends up getting caught in it. And they and Egypt is the place where they've been preparing and where there's food. So Joseph's family comes down. And Joseph immediately recognizes his family, but he does not tell them that he recognized them. And instead, there's this back and forth that goes on for quite a bit. And I believe we're going to come back to it in our Torah discussion. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. But this is also a time where we learn a little bit about Joseph's character. We watch him playing with his family and saying first, well, how am I going to trust you? How do I know you're not going to steal from me? Why you say that your 11 brothers bring me back here 12th brother, because Jacob hadn't let Benjamin go, because Benjamin, who was his favorite and had already lost Joseph, these were his two sons of his favorite wife, Rachel. He hadn't wanted to let go of his other son, but Joseph makes him go back and get him, and meanwhile keeps Simeon with him, and then he lets Simeon go, but then he plants in Benjamin's saddle his goblet and says, Benjamin stole this. There's this whole thing, and meanwhile, so Joseph is going back and he's playing with his family, but he also, meanwhile, he keeps dashing away to start crying. And this is noteworthy to me because we don't see any other. Joseph cries 7 times. There's 7 episodes of him crying through this parsha, and it seems very noteworthy. And this parsha actually doesn't end with the story getting resolved at all. He says he's going to he's upset about Benjamin stealing the goblet, and he says he's going to hold on to him, and that the other brothers need to go back to their father Jacob. And the brothers are like, we can't go back to Jacob without Benjamin. Benjamin is the one person we tried to hold on to. So for a parsha where the Milat Mancha is peace, we don't have a lot of peace going on here, and we don't have a very peaceful ending to it. So we pick up today's reading on in chapter 43, and it starts at verse 16. And our first Zumlia goes to Hannah and Dov Golding, and our first Torah reading is by Amit.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה. והערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפי עמך בית ישראל, ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל.
אמן. ותכלנה 7 שני הסבה אשר היה בארץ מצרים. ותחילנה 7 שני הרעב לבוא, כאשר אמר יוסף, ויהי רעב בכל הארצות, בכל ארץ ובכל ארץ מצרים היה לכם. ותרעב כל ארץ מצרים, ויצעק העם אל פרעה להלכם. ויאמר פרעה לכל מצרים, לכו אל יוסף, אשר יאמר לכם תעשו. והרעב היה על כל פני הארץ, ויפתח יוסף את כל אשר בהם, וישבור למצרים, ויחזק הרעב בארץ מצרים. בכל הארץ באו מצרימה לשבור אל יוסף, כי חזק הרעב בכל הארץ.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחרנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Sorry, I read the third triennial. I told you the citing for the third triennial reading. Amit, can you tell us where the second aliyah starts?
Yes, this is what I got from you originally. So we just did the first aliyah at the end of Mem Aleph. The second aliyah is Mem Bet, verses 1 through 5. And Ellie's reading that as well.
Okay, so Mem Bet is 42, verses 1 through 5. Chapter 42, verse number 1 is where we're starting. Hold on, didn't you just read that one?
No, he read 53 through 57 at the end of Mem Aleph, which was the first aliyah that you had sent us.
Right.
Ellie's reading too.
He's reading the first and the second Aliyah, and I'm reading the third Aliyah. Ellie's going to read the second Aliyah, which is 42, 1 through 5.
Great. Okay. And our second Zimlia goes to Lev on the occasion of his birthday, and it is also the anniversary of his bar mitzvah.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitzanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
V'ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratecha b'finu ובפי עמך בית ישראל, ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל.
Amen.
אמן. וירא יעקב כי יש שבר במצרים, ויאמר יעקב לבניו למה תצרעו? ויאמר הנה שמעתי כי יש שבר במצרים, ודו שמה ושיבו לנו משם ונחיה ולא נמות. וירדו אחי יוסף 10 לשפור בר ממצרים, ואת בנימין אחי יוסף לא שלח יעקב את אחיו, כי אמר פן יקראנו אסון. ויבואו בני ישראל לשפור בתוך הבאים, כי היה רעב בארץ כנען.
Happy birthday, Lev. Before our third Aliyah, I invite us to take a moment to recall those who are sick and in need of healing.
Wait, Rabbi Katz, is Lev supposed to do the after blessing?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
I invite us to take a minute to recall those who are sick and in need of healing, both in our community directly and in our country and in the world. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to say a name out loud.
Dr. Stephen Thompson, Daniel Harriman.
Dr. Meir Ben David Dvorah.
Lynette Cohen.
Jay Tomaszewski.
Barbara Bell.
Joe Crow.
Yishaberach Rabotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. And before we leave our section on healing prayers, I'm going to recite the prayer for ending of a plague from the Talmud. Master of the worlds, redeem and save, deliver and help your nation Israel from pestilence, from the sword, from plundering, from the plagues of wind, blast, and mildew, and from all types of misfortune that may break out and come into the world. Before we call, you answer. Blessed are you who ends the plague. Baruch atah utzer hamigdal.
Amen.
For our last Zimlia, I call up Jeannie Glazer, who is rising to the position of chair of the synagogue. And our third Aliyah, our third Torah reading will be chanted by me.
And that is it's chapter 42, verses 6 through 18.
Praised are you, Adonai, our God, who rules the universe, instilling in us the holiness of mitzvot by commanding us to study words of Torah. May the words of Torah, Adonai, our God, be sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of all your people, so that we, our children, and all the children of the house of Israel may come to love you and study your Torah on its own merit. Praised are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people Israel.
אמן. ויוסף הוא השליט על הארץ, הוא המשפיר לכל עם הארץ. ויבואו אחי יוסף, וישתחוו לו אפיים ארצה. וירא יוסף את אחיו, ויכירם, ויתנכר עליהם, וידבר איתם קשות. ויאמר עליהם מאין באתם, ויאמרו מארץ כנען לשבור אוכל. ויכר יוסף את אחיו, והם לא הכירוהו. ויזכור יוסף את החלומות אשר חלם להם, ויאמר עליהם מרגלים אתם לראות את ערוות הארץ באתם. ויאמרו אליו לא אדוני, ועבדיך באו לשבור אוכל. כולנו בני איש אחד אנחנו, כנים אנחנו, לא היו עבדיך מרגלים. ויאמר עליהם לא, כי ערוות הארץ באתם לראות. ויאמרו 12 עבדיך אחים אנחנו, בני איש אחד בארץ כנען. והנה הקטון את אבינו היום, והאחד איננו. ויאמר עליהם יוסף הוא, אשר דיברתי עליכם לאמור מרגלים אתם, בזאת תברכנו חי פרעה אם תצאו מזה, כי אם בבוא אחיכם הקטון הנה, שילחו מכם אחד ויקח את אחיכם, ואתם העצרו, ויבחנו דבריכם, האמת איתכם, ואם לא, חי פרעה כי מרגלים אתם. ויאסוף אותם אל משמר 3 ימים, ויאמר עליהם יוסף ביום השלישי, זאת עשו וחיו את האלוהים אני ירא.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Jeannie, as you rise to leadership, so just like Joseph does in this parsha, may your leadership be also filled with wisdom and vision for a future of plenty.
Thanks.
We now turn to our Haftorah, which is going to be chanted by Bernie Shapiro, and we're so delighted to see so many of Bernie's friends and family here with us, celebrating the anniversary of his bar mitzvah. Bernie, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bochar b'nvi'im tovim, v'rotzo v'divreihem hane'emorim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abocher b'torah uv'Moshe avdo, uv'Yisrael amo, uv'nvi'ei amet v'tzedek. Vayikat Shlomo v'hineh chalom, vayavo Yerushalayim, vayamod lifnei Aaron brit Adonai, vaya'al olot, vaya'as shlomim, vaya'as mishte l'chol avodav, oz tavona shetayim, Nashim zonot el hamelech, v'ta'amodna lefanav, v'tomer ha'isha ha'achat bi Adoni, ani ha'isha hazot, yoshvot b'bayit echad, וילד אמו בבית. ויהי ביום השלישי ללידתי, ותלד גם האישה הזאת, ואנחנו יחדיו. אין זר איתנו בבית, זולתי, שתיים אנחנו בבית. וימת בן האישה הזאת לילה, אשר שכבה עליו, ותקום בתוך הלילה, ותיקח את בני מאצלי, ומתחה ישנה, ותשכיבהו בחיקו, ואת בנו המת השכיבו בחיקי. ואקום בבוקר להניק את בני, והנה מת, ואת בונן אליו בבוקר, והנה לא היה בני אשר ילדתי. ותאמר האישה האחרת לו כי בנך חי ובנך מת, וזאת אומרת לו כי בנך מת ובני החי. ותדברנה לפני המלך. ויאמר המלך, זאת אומרת, זה בני החי ובנך מת, וזאת אומרת לו כי בנך מת ובני החי. ויאמר המלך, קחו לי חרב, ויביאו החרב לפני המלך. ויאמר המלך, גזרו את הילד החי לשניים, ותנו את החצי לאחת, ואת החצי לאחת. ותאמר האישה אשר בנה החי אל המלך, כי נחמרו רחמיה אל בנה. ותאמר בי אדוני, תנו לו את הילוד החי, והמת אל תמיתוהו. וזאת אומרת, גם לי, גם לך, לא יהיה גזרו. ויען המלך ויאמר, תנו לו את הילוד החי, והמת לא תמיתוהו. היא אמו. וישמעו כל ישראל את המשפט אשר שפט המלך, ויראו מפני המלך, כי ראו כי חכמת אלוהים בקרבו לעשות משפט. ויהי המלך שלמה מלך על כל ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות. האל הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים דבריך, ודבר אחד מדבריך, אחור לא ישוב ריקם. כי אל מלך נאמן רחמן אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני,
ברוך הוא בשמו,
האל הנאמן בכל דבריו.
אמן.
רחם על ציון כי היא בית חיינו, לעלובת נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו. ברוך אתה אדוני,
Baruch Shemo.
משמח ציון בבניה.
Amen.
שמחנו, אדוני אלוהינו, באליהו הנביא עבדך, ובמלכות בית דוד משיחך. במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו, על כיסו לא ישב זר, ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו. כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלא יכבה נרו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני,
Baruch Shemo.
מגן דוד.
Amen.
על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה, שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני,
Baruch Shemo.
מקדש השבת.
יש כוח.
Amen.
Yasher Koach. Demi Steinig is now going to lead us in a discussion, a sikha, of today's Torah portion.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom. So I'm actually going to begin with a mini Devar Torah and then open for discussion. And I'd like to dedicate this Devar Torah to my son Lev in celebration of his birthday today and the anniversary last Shabbat of his bar mitzvah. And to Lev and Talia, I reiterate the pledge that I make yearly at this time, that I will endeavor to treat them in a way such that neither of them becomes tempted to sell the other into slavery.
Won't sell you into slavery, Lev.
So as you know, we're in the middle of the Joseph story, and the Joseph story never fails to fascinate me. It's a soap opera, and it doesn't matter that we know how it ends. There's endless fodder to dissect along the way about why the story unfolds as it does. Okay, fine, Jacob favored the son of his favorite wife. The other brothers resented him. Does that really suffice to account for the brothers selling Joseph into slavery and letting Jacob think he's dead? Surely there must be more backstory. Theories abound, and various contemporary groups stand ready to claim Joseph as one of their own. Take, for example, the idea that Joseph might be gay, and not just in the Andrew Lloyd Webber version. The case is pretty simple. He flaunts fabulous clothing. He rejects the advances of Potiphar's wife. Joseph eventually fathers 2 children, but we hear no love story. There's no boy meets cute at the well story like Isaac and Jacob get. True, this is a reading through a modern lens, but the rabbinic authors of Genesis Rabbah, back around year 450, made similar observations. The Midrash says that Joseph penciled his eyes, curled his hair, and lifted his heel. The rabbis label these behaviors boyish, not effeminate, but they're certainly not considered manly. The Midrash goes on to say that when Joseph held power in Egypt, daughters of kings vied for his attention, but he would not even look at them. So let's say Joseph were gay. Would this help explain the family dynamic? Jacob accepts Joseph's proclivities, but the brothers are traditionally masculine. We might say toxically masculine. Shimon and Levi avenged their sister's lost virginity with the massacre of an entire town. Yeah, it's fair to say they might have trouble accepting Joseph. Another contemporary theory, one that Sam Barsky introduced me to, is that maybe Joseph was on the spectrum. He's a savant in some ways with his visionary dreams and his savvy financial planning, but the Torah specifically describes him as a na'ar, a youth, at an age his society would have normally deemed adult. If Joseph were on the spectrum, that would explain his tactless oversharing with his brothers, right? He would have saved himself a lot of trouble if he had just kept his mouth shut about his dreams. He didn't have to say anything. This reading potentially casts new light on his interactions with Potiphar's wife. Maybe someone better able to read social cues could have more safely navigated her advances. And maybe Joseph's special needs, as much as his status as Rachel's oldest son, are what single him out for extra attention from Jacob. But none of these readings explain the aspect of the story that I find most puzzling. Why does Joseph let Jacob go for so many years, believing him dead? When the brothers arrive in Egypt, Joseph is moved to see them. Rabbi Katz mentioned he cries 7 times. He's eager for news of his father. He's ready to move toward reconciliation. We don't get the impression that he's been nursing a grudge all these years, yet with all his power and wealth, he never thought to send a message to Jacob, letting him know that he was alive. When he knew that famine was ravaging Canaan, he didn't think to send his father food, even if anonymously. Rashi calls out Joseph on this front, noting how cavalierly Joseph starts his new life upon arrival in Egypt. Rashi writes, as soon as he saw himself a ruler in Potiphar's house, Joseph began to pamper himself with food and drink and curl his hair. God said, your father sits in mourning and you preoccupy yourself with curling your hair? Rabbi David Hoffman writes that we readers can't help but wonder, is Joseph just a narcissist? But Hoffman continues to note that the rabbinic tradition calls Joseph a tzaddik, a righteous person. How come? Hoffman cites this midrash. Even after the family is reunited in Egypt, Joseph avoids spending time alone with Jacob. He doesn't want to answer too many questions about just how he came to be living in Egypt. Joseph's story opens with a boy running to his father to tattle on his brothers for small infractions. But in the end, Joseph keeps secret the brother's biggest sin of all. He wants to spare Jacob pain and spare his brothers shame. This is his righteousness. Do I buy this account? I'm not sure. I want to, but I don't quite. Had he been determined to reach out to Jacob, Joseph could have invented a different story that accounted for all the facts. He got kidnapped by Midianites. Fighting to get away from them, he bloodied and lost his special coat. Upon arrival in Egypt, he bumped his head and had amnesia for years. Or he simply couldn't get a message to Jacob when he was first enslaved and then imprisoned. But now that he's working in Pharaoh's court, he's reaching out. And really, is Jacob going to want to ask too many questions either? Jacob may want to shelter himself from the truth of his son's behavior. So was the psychic pain just too great for Joseph? Did he successfully block all memories from his past until his brothers showed up on his doorstep? Did he at some level resent Jacob for Jacob's role in the family dynamic or feel ashamed of himself for his own role? I'm now going to turn this over to you all to hear what you think. We are blessed with a big enough crowd today that we don't quite all fit on one screen. So if you raise a physical hand, I might or might not see you. Some of you may know how on the participants button, you can raise a virtual blue hand. But if I don't see your physical hand and I don't see your blue hand and you just call out, we're a small enough crowd to work that into. So your thoughts? Oh, Lev is raising his hand.
So coincidentally, I actually heard a really good theory as to, oh dear, okay.
Sorry about that.
One moment. Okay. In school just recently, I heard an amazing theory as to why Joseph would never have reached out and made contact with Jacob. And it basically centered around some other patterns in the Torah, in the Bible, around that time of exiling people from a family. So like, for example, Ishmael gets cast out into the desert. We never hear from him again. And if you look at the story of Joseph, from Joseph's perspective, he doesn't know the crucial detail that his brothers hand his bloodied coat to Jacob and make the excuse. Joseph has no idea that happens. So it wouldn't be unreasonable for Joseph to think that he had been exiled and that his father knew exactly what had happened and was on board with it. After all, Joseph not only shared a dream with his brothers about the wheat and his brothers' sheaves of wheat bowing down to his, he also shared a dream that contained, as well as the brothers Jacob and Leah bowing down to him. Now, Jacob might not have liked that. So again, from Joseph's perspective, it makes total sense for him to think that his family doesn't want him around anymore.
It's a good thing I didn't talk to Lev about this yesterday, because then my questions would have all been answered and I would have had no Dvar Torah. Jeannie.
Well, just I happen to I've never heard the perspective or the thought of coming at it from the standpoint of Joseph not trying to shame his brothers for the deed that they did. I'm not sure I buy it either, but it's definitely food for thought. Even though it does beg the question of all these years he didn't contact, but maybe that could still tie in somehow. I don't know. And then I've also never heard the perspective or the consideration that maybe Joseph was gay. I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of a fun way of looking at it through a modern lens. So thank you for bringing those interpretations. It's just, I had not heard it before. So I thought I would share that.
Yeah. When you say you love the idea of this coming out of this righteousness of not wanting to shame his brothers, even if it doesn't quite seem plausible. I feel like anytime in the rabbinic tradition that something like that is put forward, that really seems like a stretch, but they're really trying to put a positive light on the story, it definitely reveals Jewish values, right? So whether or not we buy it, that this is what really happened, it still teaches us something.
It's always starting with the best possible interpretation and working from there. It's really the value of giving someone the benefit of the doubt. And we see it throughout our tradition, but yeah, it's thank you.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
So, this is another story in the Bible where the actual characters, if you look at it in a dispassionate way, are come across as really being bad people with mean actions. So the brothers' actions are mean. Joseph's actions, his revenge on his brothers, and the way he deals with his father, all mean. But what I think it shows that in the Bible, there's a lot of the storytelling is transparent and shows us the weaknesses and the side of human beings that is evil. And I think that is quite important in the Jewish tradition to realize that there are good people, there are bad people, there's a choice. And we don't try and present our ancestors as all being good and wonderful people.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Nathan, I'll call on you in a second. I just want to note Elise Salzberg put in the chat in response to Jeannie's idea of trying to give benefit of the doubt, that Esav is not given much benefit of the doubt in our tradition. Nathan, go ahead.
Although he does Ishmael comes back to help bury his brother, by the way, his father at the end of his life.
And Esav and Jacob do also reconcile.
But I wasn't going to, that wasn't the point I wanted to make. The point I wanted to make was a parallel between the Haftorah and the Torah portion regarding trials and finding out what's in someone's heart. Because it was just characterized that Joseph was torturing his brothers, but I think he was testing them to find out, have you changed? Do you feel the same way about my brother and me, or are you different now? And he learned they're different now. In a similar way, Solomon constructs an ordeal of trial to find out what was in the heart of the two women, to see which was actually the mother. And both are successful at determining what was in the heart of someone else, which frankly is a really difficult thing to do most of the time. So I don't think it shows that they're bad at all, but in fact, wise.
Well, it's interesting. So what you're saying about, Joseph's testing his brothers with this whole thing with the cup. I mean, that's certainly a very traditional reading of it. I guess what disturbs me a little bit is what's at stake and what he risks losing, especially vis-a-vis his father, and that if the brothers fail the test, he'll lose the chance to reconcile with his father. And even just the idea that, travel in those days is pretty risky. Like for him to repeatedly delay the reconciliation and say, well, first go back and get Benjamin. Oh, now there's the second thing with the cup. Every time that they go away again, there's a chance that they're not going to return just because they meet bandits on the road, right? I mean, so he certainly risks a lot in this test.
I would say, though, that in general, delay in Torah indicates how important the thing at the end of the delay is. So the delay of Sarah eventually having a child shows how precious a child is. And there are so many examples of women who are barren for a period of time, and then they give birth. And it's tremendous. And it's not to say that Jews have fertility issues. That's not what the point of the story is. The point of the story is to say, this is how important it is to have a child. This is how important it is to continue the generation to generation thing. Not that, if only we had fertility doctors 3,000 years ago, how much simpler our tradition would be.
That's a great point. And if we look at this as art rather than history, what's the role of delay in a story? Sharon Levy wrote in the chat that a delay in music also works that way to heighten anticipation and call attention to something the way that you're saying it can in literature. And in stories, there's often this, this sets of three that, like, the first time the brothers come, they're sent away. The second time the brothers come, they're sent away. The third time, there's this glorious reunion.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if they hadn't passed the test, then maybe he would have gone directly to his father, because then they wouldn't have been worth protecting.
Or maybe with Lev's theory that he thought his father was in on it, and he thought, well, it's still sort of foolish to think that, if the brothers haven't changed, then the father hasn't changed, even if he needed to change. They're all different people, but I certainly understand how one might think that way.
And sometimes there's collateral damage when there's estrangement in a family. Sometimes someone has a conflict with one family member and it's so painful that they leave the entire family, even at the expense of other relationships. But what I just said was a really depressing note to end on. I think I much prefer Nathan's version that it's that we see the delays as a literary device, heightening our anticipation of what does prove a happy ending. And any other thoughts before I turn things back over to the service leaders?
In my Chumash, which is not a very traditional one, it in the Haftarah it mentions how King Solomon, kind of brings out this guttural cry from the real mother, and how the term rachamim, I guess, means, which we generally interpret as compassion, actually means guts. And so it was interesting, Nathan, when you were talking about it, I was thinking maybe it's not so much reading what's in the other person's gut, but what's in our own gut.
And who are you thinking of Joseph trying to find out what he himself really feels?
Yeah, because I guess the word rachamim comes up when he's crying. That's where it's used.
Yeah, it may be that Joseph really has no idea how ready he is to forgive his brothers until he sees them. I'm going to tell a little anecdote. I love this story. My friend was getting married. Her in-laws were divorced, and it had a fairly rancorous divorce. And her mother-in-law hadn't seen her father-in-law in maybe 20 years. And the fear and dread and anxiety around seeing her ex was really interfering with the joy of the day of her son getting married. But her mother-in-law hosted a sort of open house for out-of-town guests the day before the wedding. And her ex showed up at the door, and she was just so much in the rhythm of, opening the door and saying, welcome to everybody. And she didn't even immediately recognize him. Like for half a second, she didn't know who he was and just opened the door and said, welcome. And then she was like, oh, it's you. And then she was like, well, okay, welcome. And she realized that she thought there was still all of this animosity and tension, but when she saw him, she realized it was gone. So maybe that's part of what happens between all of these pairs of brothers, when Ishmael and Isaac reconcile, and when Esau and Jacob reconcile, and now when Joseph and his brothers reconcile, that the sort of pleasant surprise of, oh, 20 years have passed. We're grown-ups now. We can let go of what we did to each other as children. Well, Lev just whispered to Talia, please don't sell me into slavery. I think that's a good note to end on, to turn things back to the service leaders. Thank you, all of you, for your thoughts, for helping me deepen my understanding of the story. Talia says to Lev, I couldn't find anyone to buy you if I tried. I think his grandparents might beg to differ.
I do take offense.
They wouldn't say that.
I'd better mute us now.
So we'll now turn to our communal prayers. I want to, as we, before we end the Torah service, I also want to invite folks to think about if you want to share some good news that you want to share with the community by way of blessing us all with your good news. But I'll give you a couple minutes to think about it while we say our standard prayers. The prayer for the country and service members will be led by Stan and Sandy Feinstein, and then the prayer for Israel by Dov and Hannah Golding, and then the prayer for peace by Sheriff Feinstein.
Guess I should do that.
Yeah.
Should I do the prayer for the country now?
Yes, please.
Okay, a prayer for our country. Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessings for our country, for its government, for its leaders and advisors, and for all who exercise just and rightful authority. Teach them insights from your Torah, that they may administer all affairs of state fairly, that peace and security, happiness and prosperity, justice and freedom may forever abide in our midst. Creator of all flesh, bless all the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. May citizens of all races and creeds forge a common bond in true harmony, to banish hatred and bigotry, and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions that are the pride and the glory of our country. May this land under your providence be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom, helping them to fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us say, Amen.
Prayer for those serving their country. Our God and God of our ancestors, protect the men and women who serve in our armed forces, together with all innocent persons, regardless of nationality, who are endangered by war. Guide those who serve our country in foreign lands to act with the highest standards of justice and humanity. May our servicemen and servicewomen who are separated from their loved ones speedily return to the arms of the ones who love them, whole in both body and spirit. And may our country and the world know only peace.
Amen.
Prayer for the state of Israel is next.
אוקיי. אבינו שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו, ברך את מדינת ישראל, ראשית צמיחת גאולתנו. הגן עליה בעברת חסדך, ופרוס עליה סוכת שלומך. ושלח אורך ואמתך לראשיה, שריה ויועציה, ותקנם בעצה טובה מלפניך. חזק את ידי מגיני ארץ קודשנו, והנחילם אלוהינו ישועה, ועטרת ניצרון תעטרם. ונתת שלום בארץ, ושמחת עולם ליושביה, ונאמר אמן.
Amen. Prayer for peace.
A prayer for peace. May we see the day when war and bloodshed cease, when a great peace will embrace the whole world. Then nation will not threaten nation, and mankind will not again know war. For all who live on earth shall realize we have not come into being to hate or to destroy. We have come into being to praise, to labor, and to love. Compassionate God, bless the leaders of all nations with the power of compassion. Fulfill the promise conveyed in Scripture. I will bring peace to the land, and you shall lie down, and no one shall terrify you. I will rid the land of vicious beasts, and it shall not be ravaged by war. Let love and justice flow like a mighty stream. Let peace fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And let us say,
Amen. And we continue with the Eitz Chaim He on bottom of page 154, or on the top of page 426.
I mean, I wanted to invite if anybody wanted to share a bit of good news that they wanted to, if we could take a minute to do that first. Yeah, Alan.
Yeah, we have heat in the house. It's so nice to sit in the house without a coat on.
I mean, Betsy.
In August, I agreed with the Michigan State Library that I was going to do some work for them that was really too much to do in just 4 months. But I finished it yesterday! That's all. Thank you.
That's a big thing.
It is. You can't believe what a load off my shoulders it is. It's just fabulous. It's over.
Speaking of it's over, 31 days, 45 minutes, it's over.
This is my sister Beth. She's been recovering from COVID-19 for the last few weeks, and she's ready to go back to the house in Potomac, and my father is recovered. He's ready to go back, and we're all glad to be feeling good.
And I thank my spirit and physical guides of Doris and Nathan of enormous wisdom, heart, and generosity. They brought me back.
We're delighted to hear that.
I would like to share that I had the absolute joy of visiting with Betsy and Stuart and my grandson with my daughter this morning as he did his tummy time and she played the piano and we sang together to him.
That's beautiful. Thank you all for sharing. I'll pass the baton back to Meet to lead us through the end of our service.
So Natan's going to be leading our service starting with the time. We're going to stand for that and then go into the Chati Kaddish and the Amida.
Page is the bottom of 154 in the Shabbat Siddur and the top of page 426 in the weekday Siddur.
Etz Chaim hi lamachzikim ba betomcheha meushav L'racheha drachei noam bechol netivoteha shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Chadesh Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu kekedem. Page 155. Or 428.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועמד ברכותי והמליך מלכותי, בחייך עוד יום יומך וחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם לעולמי יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי תקודשה לילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. 156b or 430. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah האל הגדול והגיבור והנורא אל עליון גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל לזוכר חסדי אבות ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחי מתים אתה להושיע משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם מכלכל חיים בחסד מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים צומח נופלים והופך עולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר מכמוך בר דיבורו ומדום אליו מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה ונעמת על החיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. נעריצך ונקדישך כסוד שיח שפי קודש המקדישים שמך בקודש ככתוב על יד נביאך וקרא זה ואמר קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוא כל הארץ כבודו קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוא כל הארץ כבודו כבודו מלא עולם משרתיו שואלים זה לזה היה מקום כבודו לעומתם ברוך יאמרו ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו הוא ייתן ברחמים ויחון עם יחדים שמו ערב הבוקר בכל יום תמיד פעמיים ביערה שמע אומרים שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד הוא אלוהינו הוא אבינו הוא מלכנו הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו שנית לעיני כל חי להיות לכם אלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם ובדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור ימלוך אדוני על ציון לדור ודור הללויה לדור ודור לדור ודור לדור ודור נגיד גודלך לדור ודור לדור ודור נגיד גודלך ולנצח נצחים ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד לדור ודור לדור ודור נגיד גודלך לדור ודור נגיד גודלך כי המלך גדול גדול וקדוש גדול וקדוש אתה כי המלך גדול גדול וקדוש גדול וקדוש אתה ברוך אתה אדוני אל הקדוש.
The Amida is read silently, turning back to page 156 or 430.
sim, sim, sim shalom, sim shalom tova ubracha ba'olam, sim, sim, sim shalom tova ubracha. ואין בחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך, אחינו אבינו כולנו גרך באור פניך. שים, 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 שים שלום, שים שלום טובה וברכה בעולם, שים, שים, שים שלום טובה וברכה. כי מאור פניך נתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, תורת חיים ואהבת חסד, צדקה וברכה ורחמים וחיים ושלום. שים שלום, שים, שים, שים שלום, שים שלום טובה וברכה בעולם, שים, שים, שים שלום טובה וברכה. טוב בעיניך לברך את עמך, את עמך ישראל, בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שים, 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 שים שלום, שים שלום טובה וברכה בעולם, שים, שים, שים שלום טובה וברכה. Now we're going to page 181 in the Shabbat Siddur and page 506 in the weekday for Kaddish Shalem. יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה, בעמד דברכותי והמליך מלכותי, בחיי אחרון ובמכון ובחיי בכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם לעולם היה יתברך, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתעשה, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו, לעולם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. תקבל צורות ההון ובאות ההון, דכל ישראל קדם ובהון די ושמע ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום רבה מן שמיים וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
182 for En Kelohenu.
En Kelohenu, En Kelohenu, En Kemalkeinu, En Kemoshienu, Mi Kelohenu, Mi Kelohenu, Mi Kelohenu, Mi Kemoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shektiru Avotenu, Levanecha et Ketoret Hasanim. Now on page 183 in the Shabbat Siddur and 510 in the weekday for Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקינו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל עמונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוצר שמיים ויסד הארץ, ומושך לקרוב בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו מגבי מרומים, ובאלוהינו העינות, אמת מלכנו אפס תולתו, כך כתוב בתורתו, בדתיון בהשבותה אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת, אינו. וכך כתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
Shemo Echad. I'm turning it back to the rabbi to do Mourner's Kaddish.
Today we mark the yahrzeits of Ethel Lillian Salzberg, mother of Steve Salzberg, Fanny Neven, Jeff Anders' grandmother, and this week's yahrzeits are Rabbi Michael Hecht, father of Aya Hecht, Hyman Robinson, father of Harriet Rubinson, Hyman Rubinson, and Ruth Russian, mother of Sheila Russian. Anybody else? Mourner's Kaddish. Gadol, Vit Kadash.
Kadash Ne'Rabah, Yama Dibra Kivke, Yamli Kivke, Hayy Dachol Bet Yisrael, Hagbola Vizman Kuki Vimru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Leolah Amen Omar. Yetorah V'Yisabah V'Yisar V'Yisraman V'Yisnashe. V'Yisadar, V'Yisalel, V'Yisalach, Shemei V'Yishalach, V'Elah, V'Yisratah, V'Yisratah, Amira, V'Yama, V'Yamre, Amen. Yehi Shlama, Rabba, Min Shemaya, V'Hayim, Aleinu, V'Yakal Yisrael, Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom, Amah, V'Yaseh Shalom. Aleinu v'Yakal Yisrael, Yimru, Amen.
Announcement.
Shabbat Shalom, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. I think most of you know, but for those who don't, my name is Jeannie Glazer, and I am the chair of Chavrei Tzedek Congregation. If this is your first time here, welcome, and thank you for joining us here today. We're really glad you're here, and I hope you'll stay and schmooze at the virtual Kiddush today. I want to begin by thanking our service leaders and volunteers this week. For Shacharit, Amit Golding, the Torah introduction, Rabbi Katz, the Torah readers, Amit and Ellie Golding, Haftorah, Bernie Shapiro, the fabulous Devar and discussion, Debbie Steinig, and Musaf, expertly led by Natan. Today's Kiddush is sponsored by Dov and Hannah Golding in honor of their wonderful children and grandchildren who did the whole service today, Amit, Sharon, Ellie, and Natan. Our coming events tomorrow, Sunday, December 20th at 5 p.m. in the virtual sanctuary. We have a limud by Rabbi Katz titled Not in Heaven, an Introduction to Halakha and the Conservative Movement. This was also generously sponsored by Dov and Hannah Golding. And Thursday, December 24th, we are having our traditional, yet not so traditional because of COVID, Chinese food and movie at 6:30 p.m. in the virtual sanctuary. We have Bring Your Own Chinese, and the movie starts at 7:15. It will be streaming through the virtual sanctuary called Tel Aviv on Fire, and it will have subtitles. I said, yeah, the movie begins at 7:15. Our next service will be held here in the virtual sanctuary this coming Saturday, December 26th, 5:45 for Ma'ariv and Havdalah. And now I hand it back over to Natan for Adon Olam.
Okay. And Adon Olam is on page 187 in the Shabbat Siddur and 514 in the weekday one. Adon Olam. Hashem Malach B'terem Kol Yetzir Nivra Le'nasa B'chef Sokol Azai Melech Shemoni Ka'a'a'a'ah V'acharei Kiflot HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora V'hu Haya V'hu Hove V'hu Haya V'hi Yara V'hu Echad V'ein Sheni L'hamshilo L'hafira B'li Reshit B'li Tachlit V'lo Ha'oz V'ha'misra V'hu Eli V'chago Eli V'tuach Evli V'etzara V'hu Nisi Umanos Li Menad Kasi V'yomeka V'ya'ado Avki Duchi V'tishan V'ayira V'yimuchi Geviyati Adon Ali V'lo Ira Shabbat Shalom.
We all need to get our grape juice or wine, so in preparation for Kiddush, which will be led by my parents, I'm just going to get us a cup of wine. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. And after the Kiddush blessings, we'll divide up into breakout rooms so we can chat a little bit more easily. So stick around. Gail, if you can make me co-host or host, I can do that for us. Dov and Chana, you're on mute. So just a reminder to take yourselves off mute when you're ready to make Kiddush.
So I'm ready. Is everybody ready with their wine and grape juice? ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש. סברים ארנן ורבותיי, ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן.
Amen.
So you'll get an invitation to join a breakout room. Feel free to go if you want. You can also stick around in this room if you want.
You may want to stop the live stream on the YouTube.